Astrology is an incredibly powerful tool for self-knowledge, for understanding the world, and for connecting with the divine. But like any tool, it can be used for good or for evil. And I think I found the most evil use of astrology in recorded history. In this episode of World Astrology Report, we're going to dig right into it. And to find this historical example, we have to head back to, where else? The Roman Empire. Being a Roman emperor was an incredibly cutthroat job. More than half of the Roman emperors died violent deaths. The stabbing to death of Caesar by a mob of angry senators was not exactly unusual. So it's not surprising that Roman emperors would get very paranoid. Most of the Roman emperors believed in astrology and were advised by court astrologers. One of these was Tiberius, who reigned from 14 to 37 CE. And he was one of the most terrifying and tyrannical emperors in Roman history. Tiberius used the astrologer Thrasyllus, the most brilliant astrologer of his era. And there's a famous story about how Tiberius found Thrasyllus. Tiberius had an interesting method for testing new astrologers. He would summon the astrologer to his villa and then take him up a cliff by his house, accompanied by a strong servant. He'd then quiz the astrologer about his fate, meaning the fate of Tiberius. If he thought the astrologer lacked skill or was deceiving him, he would be thrown off the cliff to his death. Now eventually Thrasyllus, who was renowned as a skillful astrologer, was summoned to Tiberius's villa and taken to the cliff. Thrasyllus forecast a great future for Tiberius, and Tiberius was really impressed with his skills. So Tiberius asked him another question. What is your destiny, Thrasyllus? Thrasyllus looked at his own chart, did some calculations, and turned white with fear. This very moment may be my last, he said. Tiberius was astonished. He hugged Thrasyllus and made him his personal astrologer and confidant for life. Now that's a pretty terrifying story, but it's not what I'm thinking of as the example of the most evil use of astrology in history. Yes, it gets worse. If you're enjoying this video, please do me a favor and give it a like. And if you haven't already, do subscribe to the channel. Thanks, I love you. Tiberius was certainly one of the most tyrannical emperors, but about 50 years later, another real tyrant, possibly even worse, comes along, Domitian. Domitian was one of the cruelest emperors in recorded history. He demanded to be addressed as master and god. And he was terrified of being assassinated because when he was young, astrologers had forecast the exact date and method of his death by the sword. Now, by the end of his reign between 93 and 96 CE, Domitian was executing and torturing and exiling anyone he suspected of plotting against him. But it's when we read about what the historian and senator Cassius Dio says about Domitian that we find the most evil use of astrology in history. Domitian had his astrologers draw up the charts of every prominent man in Rome. The astrologers would inspect these men's charts to see if they showed promise as imperial rulers. And then, regardless of whether these men had shown any interest in power or not, they were rounded up and executed. That, as far as I'm aware, is the most evil use of astrology in recorded history. It's like a kind of ancient astrological version of Minority Report.
We are arresting individuals who have broken no law.
But they will. The commission of the crime itself is absolute metaphysics. The precongs see the future and they're never wrong.
But it's not the future if you stop it.
And it does make me wonder about the future, because in this video, which you can watch right now, I talk about the future of astrology. And I explain how I think astrology is probably only going to grow in popularity over the coming decades during this age of air. So it does make me wonder what might happen in politics, in business, in war, if artificial intelligence gets very, very good at astrology. Hopefully, nothing like this.